Okay, so this webinar today is an activity of the California Farm Demonstration Network. This is a multi-institutional collaboration that was formalized in 2017 by an agreement signed by 6 major agriculture serving institutions and agencies in California. And the main mission of the Farm Demonstration Network is for these entities to all work together to establish a network of on-farm demonstration sites where farmers and ranchers can benefit from peer-to-peer learning and joint innovation to spread conservation farming practices and climate-smart agriculture. And here we go. The farmer and rancher focused work of the network happens through regional or thematic hubs, most of which are collaborations between cooperative extension offices and resource conservation districts. And we know I have a lot of you all in cooperative extension and RCDs on the webinar today. We don't yet have hubs covering the entire state, but there's definitely potential to get better coverage in the future. So if you are interested in learning more, please either contact us or please also check out the website calfarmdemo.org, where you can see more information and see all the types of demonstration farms that are already listed on there. And I also want to acknowledge that for our current 2-year period, this network and this webinar today is being funded by University of California Climate Action Seed Grant. So today, let me introduce our speakers and our panelists. So we are being joined by colleagues from the Carbon Cycle Institute, Lynette, Niebrugge, and Jeff Creque, and they will give a short presentation first, and then we'll be joined by our producer panelists. And we're very lucky today to have Joseph Button from the Straus family Creamery, which is a really innovative organic dairy producer in Marin and Sonoma counties. And we have Lani Cockrell of Lani's Lana, that's Lana as in wool, right? Wool producer in the mountains in Northeastern California and going into Nevada also. And finally, we have Michelle Bearmar from Black Mountain Farm from way down in San Diego County. So we have some great coverage across the state. And with that, let me turn it over to my colleagues. And I'll stop sharing. Okay. Go ahead, Lynette.
I think, Jeff, you're going to kick us off here.
Great. Thanks, Sonja. And thanks to all you folks joining today. Delighted to be here. So I'm Jeff Creque with the Carbon Cycle Institute. Carbon Cycle Institute was formed in 2013 and grew out of the work of the Marin Carbon Project. And our basic mission is to advance the carbon cycle, the global carbon cycle, as a fundamental organizing concept, fundamental organizing phenomenon underlying land management and on-farm conservation, and particularly as all of this falls within the context of the global climate crisis. So that's really the basis of our work and the basis of the carbon farm planning process we'll talk about today. Next slide, please. So as you can see here, of course, I'm sure most of you are familiar with the Keeling curve, which is the graph in blue. Started taking measurements of atmospheric carbon dioxide in 1950, 52, I believe, and on up to the present. And you can see that really rapidly rising level of CO2 in the atmosphere. And as we all know, this is largely due to our promiscuous use of fossil fuels and their combustion and conversion from carbon to carbon dioxide. But what is less frequently acknowledged or understood is that, as shown in the inset graph there, worked by Sanderman and others, much of that CO2, about a third of that excess CO2 in the atmosphere, is actually originating from our land management, or we might say our land mismanagement practices, our loss of carbon, the loss of carbon from our soils and our grazing lands and our croplands. So a very significant contribution from our working lands. And as you can see, a very rapid rise in the loss of carbon from those systems. Again, really initiating particularly rapidly following the 1700s or so, with the rapidly increasing human population and increasing acreage involved in tilled agriculture. Next slide, please. So you can see here that not only have we contributed a significant amount of carbon from our working lands, as shown by Sanderman's work on the left, but on the right, you see a graph from Shramsky's work in 2015, pointing out that not only have we lost significant amounts of carbon from our working landscapes, but we have also reduced the amount of phytomass on the planet through our extreme levels of harvesting of biomass over the last 2,000 years, but particularly over the last couple of hundred years. And so not only are we rapidly increasing carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere, losing that CO2 from our working lands, we have also really compromised the capacity of vegetation on the planet to absorb that excess CO2 from the atmosphere. So we're really burning our candle at both ends. Next slide. I think it's helpful to step back and think about, what is the carbon cycle? What is the global carbon cycle? And it's, this vast and temporally extensive movement of carbon amongst the 5 major carbon pools on the planet. And so, of course, plants are drawing down carbon from the atmosphere. They're transforming it into biomass. Some of that is ending up as soil carbon. Some of that is moving into our ocean systems now. Our oceans having done a great job of absorbing much of the excess CO2 in the atmosphere. Unfortunately, they've reached saturation, they're acidifying, and we're seeing all the consequences of that. And yet we continue to burn fossil fuels and drive this cycle increasingly out of balance. Really importantly, and something we don't necessarily always think about, is the role of carbon as a source of energy for our dynamic working landscapes. Because photosynthesis involves the transformation of solar radiation into biochemical energy, into plant biomass, and subsequently cascades through the food web. Carbon in our systems represents energy, solar energy in our systems. So as we capture more carbon from the atmosphere and transform it into biomass, we actually increase the energy levels in our working land systems. Next slide, please. So what's carbon farming, and how does it relate to these various other types of agriculture that we talk about a lot? Regenerative, sustainable, holistic management, organic farming, agroecology. What do these things all have in common? And our position is, the reason we use the term carbon farming is precisely for what I said previously, which is we recognize that all of these systems or methodologies or philosophies, or however you want to think about them, really only function due to their ability to capture and recycle carbon and conserve carbon within the farm system. So by naming carbon farming as carbon farming, we center our focus on the actual operative mechanism driving change within these various methodologies or philosophies, if you will. Next slide, please. So just to really drill down on this and emphasize that our goal here is to view the farm system as a system, and to recognize that system change is driven by a change in system energy dynamics. And in the case of working lands, when we talk about a change in energy dynamics, we're really talking about the ability of that system to capture solar radiation and then transform it throughout the working land ecosystem. Engaging agriculture as a climate solution is really obviously critical. Ag has been painted with a rather dark brush, suggesting that ag is is a contributor to the climate problem. And in fact, historically, that's true, but we also see ag as an incredibly potent strategy for helping to stabilize the climate system. And that's the opportunity that we're trying to highlight with the whole concept of carbon farming. And finally, what we're really trying to do is manage our working lands to accelerate that transformation of solar radiation into the products of agriculture, food, flora, fauna, and fuel. So this is really the potential to transform the dialogue and transform the process of agriculture into a dynamically positive force for change at the global scale. Next slide, please. So with respect to California, I think we face some real challenges in our state at this time. This is an image, obviously, from the 1935 Dust Bowl, Oklahoma, but you could find this same image in the San Joaquin Valley in virtually any summer over the last couple of decades. And with warming, drying conditions across the state, across the globe, of course, but across the state, the question is, where are we going with ag in California? And are we doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past, or can we begin to think differently about the way we manage our working lands and begin to move our entire agricultural ecosystem in a new positive direction? Next slide. Again, some fairly disturbing information. This is fairly old data now. This is from the California Energy Commission from 2012, but looking at how we might view the vulnerability of agriculture across California, and not just with respect to climate, but many factors are involved here, but climate being a very important one, socioeconomic considerations. But you can see that for the most part, our agriculturally productive regions are at fairly high risk, highly vulnerable to these various influences. And one of those, of course, is increasing salinity of our Central Valley soils, largely due to our irrigation practices. And this is an old story, goes back at least 2,000 years to the Fertile Crescent and mistakes that were made across the world historically. And we seem to be ignoring that history and repeating ourselves here in the great state of California. So we have a lot of challenges, as I'm sure all of you are well aware, but this is really where we stand in California today. The next slide, please. So the implications of a changing climate for crop production in California, for yields particularly, are not positive. This is showing change in yields for several major crops in the state under two different climate scenarios. And unfortunately, our emission scenario today is in the higher realm. So we're trending towards this lower trending line, particularly impactful for, of course, tomato, wheat, rice, sunflower, cotton. All of these things are facing reduced yields over time, given current climatic trends, warming trends. Next slide, please. So importantly, I think, and directly related to this entire phenomenon, is the state of organic matter in the state's soils. And with some notable exceptions, the Delta, obviously, organic soils of the Delta and some fairly high carbon soils on the Central Coast, we see that the state productive soils of the state are operating at extremely low levels of organic matter, and in the realm of 1%, even less in some cases. And that's a very significant issue for a number of reasons. It's, I think, helpful to note that were we to increase our soil organic matter just by 1% across what CDFA has called its 24 million acres of ag land in the state, which obviously includes crop and probably irrigated pasture, we're talking about transferring about 440 million metric tons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere to our soils. And that's a 1% increase just in the plow layer alone. So we have enormous potential, unfathomable potential to transfer CO2 from the atmosphere beneficially to our soils in California and, of course, globally. Next slide. So work done by Flint and others for the fourth climate assessment back in 2018 some modeling work suggested that if we could increase our soil organic matter by 3% across 44 million acres, that includes some rangeland acreage as well as cropland and pasture land in California, what we call the 44 million working land acres in California. We're looking at about 4.7 million acre feet of increased water holding capacity across the state. And this includes, if we include climatic water deficit decreases, decreased runoff, increased evapotranspiration, that is increased plant productivity, we're looking at a total of about 6.6 million acre feet of additional water storage or water efficiency, water use efficiency across the state. Over a third of the amount of water that we use every year in our non-forage crop production. And just for context, if you think about the proposed site's reservoir, which is expected to hold about 1.5 million acre feet of water, you can see the significance of this. And the state is prepared to spend billions of dollars to build that reservoir, and yet we see relatively small investment in the potential of our soils to hold that water and act as a massive reservoir for water across California. Next slide. Importantly, and this is work by McDermott and others, it's important to note that the hydrological impact of the loss of soil carbon, as represented by Sanderman's work, is equivalent to that of climate change itself. So when we talk about drought in California, yes, we can blame climate change, but we also have to blame ourselves as we look at how we have managed or mismanaged our soil organic matter across the state. So the implications of increasing soil organic matter, as I think are graphically illustrated here, this happens to be an image from Australia, but you can see that on exactly the same soils, one side managed for carbon, one where that's really not a consideration in management. You can see the entrained sediment in that surface water. Much of that water will evaporate before it ever gets into the soil, whereas on the other side, you see whatever rainfall has occurred there has been absorbed and is being stored in the soils and biomass on that side of the fence. So really critically important factor. And of course, that increased water holding capacity implies increases in the ability of that soil to provide all the ecosystem services associated with a carbon-rich, healthy soil. Next slide. So how do we lose carbon from our soils? Well, obviously, erosion, whether by wind or water, is a major factor. We remove biomass in the form of hay and other crops. And finally, through biotic respiration, through tillage, where we accelerate the oxidation of carbon from our soils. So there are many, many ways to lose soil carbon, and we've done a very good job of employing all of them historically. Next slide. But we also have many ways to increase carbon in our agricultural ecosystems. Photosynthesis, of course, is the operative mechanism. And then the question is, what do we do with that captured carbon? Do we recycle it within our farm system? Do we manage it for conservation and keep it within our systems? And critically important how we manage that carbon. And then finally, we can always bring in carbon from outside. From another system, hopefully one that's being managed to produce an excess of biomass resources, and we can apply that in the form of manures or compost or mulches and other materials. So many ways to increase carbon in our systems, and that's really one of the focuses of the carbon farm planning process, to identify all those opportunities on the farm landscape. Next slide. So again, just to drill down and emphasize this concept of recarbonizing the biosphere. This is work by Lal and others, recognizing this potential, this enormous potential to manage the flow of solar energy into and through our farm systems for the purpose of not only building soil organic matter, soil fertility, but also increasing farm production and increasing all of the biodiversity and complexity of our farm ecosystems. And this schematic from NRCS, where you can see the solar radiation being transformed into biomass through the process of photosynthesis, and then that energy then cascading throughout the ecosystem. And that's exactly what we're talking about here. Next slide. So we've had a kind of an extractive model of a farm model. We have come into virgin territories, rich, deep soils accumulated over millennia, and then we basically took what we could take. And our farming methods have allowed us to do that, but the result has been a downward spiral of soil degradation, ecosystem degradation, biodiversity loss, and processes of soil degradation that we're all very familiar with. So the more we take, of course, the less the system can give, and so we're forced to support the system with external inputs such as synthetic chemicals, synthetic fertilizers, and yet we still see declining yields globally, even in the face of this now multi-decade effort to prop things up with chemical alternatives. Next slide. The sort of the end product, this happens to be a farm in Marin County after about 100 years of this type of extractive agriculture. And you can see an incised gully through what was formerly a wet meadow system, a farm pretty much in decline. And yet we know we can do better than this, and we do have alternatives to this. But again, loss of soil, loss of carbon, loss of water from this system. Next slide. And yet, again, we have this option to think about reversing this trend, to utilize the framework of carbon farming to begin to increase our soil organic carbon, increase our soil biodiversity, our mega and microfauna activity in our soils, build regenerative processes, strengthen our nutrient and water cycles, improve the rhizospheric dynamics, supplying the necessary food in the form of carbon-based materials to our soils, increase our use of the efficiency of the inputs we do apply, and increase our ecosystem services, and build this upward spiral of increasing fertility and dynamic and energy dynamics within our farm systems. Next slide, please. And so we can see that same farm system 20 years into the process, starting with some great work that the RCD did, the Resource Conservation District in Marin County, 20 years ago, major riparian restoration effort on this farm, followed by a managed grazing, planting, orchard development, hedgerows, windbreaks, and all of this adding, obviously, very visibly, adding significant quantities of carbon to the system, allowing more water to be held in the system, and beginning to rewater that degraded wet meadow system. So very dynamic process, using techniques that are well, time-tested, 80 years of soil conservation work through the Soil Conservation Service manifested here. And you can see those numbers, those carbon dioxide numbers associated with each of those practices. And this is, again, it's sort of at the core of the carbon farm planning process, where we make an effort to quantify in terms of carbon dioxide equivalents, the greenhouse gas benefits of the activities that the producer is undertaking on their farm landscape. Next slide. Again, NRCS has basically adopted this concept, defining carbon farm planning as a whole farm conservation plan that will enhance soil health, increase carbon sequestration, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And in classic conservation format, the planner works with the client to develop the plan, to address resource concerns on the farm, but focusing on opportunities for carbon sequestration of the entire operation, and recognizing that carbon dynamics really are at the heart of virtually all the common natural resource concerns that we see developing on farm landscapes. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Lynette, to talk about the carbon farm planning process.
Thanks, Jeff. And thank you for that great introduction to carbon cycle literacy. What we do here at Carbon Cycle Institute, what I focus on is training and education, and really thinking about what is carbon farm planning. And I think Jeff has already really gone into explaining that well. It is a whole farm approach to optimizing carbon capture, and it is based on the NRCS conservation planning process, which we use this so we can have a way for everything to be very transparent through across the state and nationally as well. And it's really managing our agroecosystem processes to use the selected farming and conservation practices. And really, the big thing is that these practices are not regenerative, but they're practices deployed appropriately that can drive those regenerative processes. So really thinking about the actual landscape that you're on at this point in time, thinking about those photos that Jeff just showed of that degraded landscape of extracting carbon. And then in these carbon farm plans, thinking about that whole farm approach of how to optimize that carbon, thinking about 20 years later, that same farm, how they've started to implement various practices. So this planning process is really about helping to consolidate and think of those suite of practices that can really sequester carbon. So we'd like to show this slide. What is a carbon farm plan? It's really, I think of it as a creative exercise of identifying all of those opportunities on farm that can increase that sequestration and decrease those greenhouse gas emissions. So really thinking about the carbon cycle, the role of carbon, and carbon as that organizing principle for land management. And then really these carbon farm plans not only are to work with your producer in creating them, but they're also have various other meanings to them. They are a vehicle for increasing climate and carbon literacy, like I said, amongst producers, but also technical assistance providers, local, state, and federal agencies, and consumers in the supply chain. Really, it's building climate and agriculture expertise and programs amongst our technical service providers and producers, and thinking about this planning goes beyond just RCDs. We do have several partners like Food Shed in San Diego, Napa Green, and Straus who actually deploy carbon farm planning for producers in their networks. And it's really a great roadmap for climate mitigation opportunities in the whole farm, ranch, and regional framework. And one of the things that Jeff and I like to say is we know that a successful carbon farm plan has been written when we have cultivated carbon farmers. And as we've said a couple times already, that carbon farm practices are really our tools for driving regenerative ag processes. So really our focus needs to shift from thinking about one single practice and that isolation for becoming more holistic of just doing one thing like, grazing. But we really need to start to shift our thinking to really thinking about integrated approaches to really maximize our carbon sequestration on our agricultural soils. So thinking about a whole suite of practices on that landscape. And that can be anything from cover crop, integrating animals into your cover cropping systems, windbreaks, hedgerows, silvopastures, organic matter amendments, reduced tillage, and all of these things are achievable on a landscape, as you just saw in those photos that Jeff was able to show us. So one of the major things about a carbon farm plan is that we do quantify greenhouse gas benefits in these plans. So if everything on that farm that we have imagined that could potentially be done, we can quantify what that drawdown is. And so back when we started this work in 2013, the Marin Carbon Project worked with Colorado State University to develop the carbon farm Comet Planner tool as a way for us to be able to do quick and easy quantifications while planning. And that tool is something that we still use today in our carbon farm planning process. Oftentimes we do find that there are practices missing in our areas or regions. So we do like to express that it is not the end all be all that you have to use Comet Planner. You can use other methods such as the USDA methods for entity scale inventory, peer-reviewed data if it's local to where you are when it's available, and other models that are specific to what you're trying to plan for, which might be Comet Farm. And then in this next slide, I know that some of you on this call might be uh, looking for research opportunities. So we just wanted to make sure that we provided a list of research ideas that have already been done to help inform carbon farm plans. And this can ideally help you preview areas of further research. In addition to carbon farm planning, we're always continuing to build tools and models. And our next tool that we're trying to build is the carbon farm planning portal. We are about 50% halfway through building this carbon farm planning portal, which will really help carbon farm planners on the ground really streamline their work. So it will have different components of being able to have efficiency of planning and integrate in the Comet tools as well as mapping tools. But this will really help to open up the opportunity for planners to spend more time out on the ground physically with the producers, and cut down on the time that it takes planners to actually create the plans throughout different platforms. Another aspect of this portal will be that it will have like a monitoring and verification component to it. So a producer will also have access so they can go in and help collect and determine what exactly has been implemented on their farm so that it can be used for supply chains or stakeholders such as grant funders. And then this photo here on the right-hand side that we're looking at is just what a potential carbon farm plan could look like, the concept of one. And when you do think about all opportunities on the landscape, so thinking about on this plan, we actually put in additional fencing, water facilities, which are supporting practices to help us manage this land, all the way through our grazing management, prescribed grazing, adding compost, identifying resource concerns where we can do other types of mitigation in our riparian systems and agroforestry. So this just shows how intricate a plan can look over time. So the big question is, how do we scale this work? Well, there's many avenues that we can scale this work. And really the solution starts at the field scale in communicating, assessing, planning, and implementing, and then on to the regional scale to think about recarbonizing and reducing emissions, and then beyond to the state scale. So are really thinking about how we do this is providing long-term access and engagement to our technical service providers, technical assistant providers, like many of you here. CCI is very dedicated to continuing to train up folks in this area and really building the producer carbon literacy through carbon farm planning and that TA engagement and management of adaptation and ongoing practices, implementation for recarbonizing and resilience. And I just want to bring in here that we have been working with regional hubs throughout the state that also coincide with the hubs that Sonja talked about earlier. But these hubs specifically are composed of 42 RCDs throughout the state who have formally organized into specific regions over 12.5 million acres of ag land. And really their goals are to, the goals of the hubs are really to capitalize on these strong institutional relationships that exist within their regions, to increase that TA capacity, staffing, resource sharing, build those regional partnerships, building and coordinating amongst different entities like the USDA, NRCS, and UC Extension, and other entities that may coincide in those areas. and really greatly expand these climate beneficial agricultural outreach and education efforts. And one of the other things that they are really working towards is providing trainings through their region for their staff and for producers. And that right here is displayed that these hubs really have a giant local impact of this knowledge sharing, resource sharing, equipment sharing, having this peer-to-peer learning, problem solving amongst organizations within those regional hubs, regional assessments and planning that go beyond carbon farm planning at the field scale, but really thinking about climate action planning and what that might look like within their region. So really building carbon farm planning capacity, just like I said, it can be done at multiple scales. So at the farm level, and then we can also think about it at the county level, the county landscape level for climate action planning, and then regional levels, and then how that can really help to influence climate agricultural policy and programs at the state level. And then my last slide, I just wanted to let you guys know that through all this training that I've been talking about, CCI does a virtual carbon farm planning training annually with Chico State Center for Regenerative Ag and Resilient System. This is also through their TAP program. Oftentimes we do offer a second training once or twice or another time a year. That just varies depending on what the needs are and how many people really want to attend the training. We also do continuing education through our monthly cafe hours. This time that you're here today is basically our monthly cafe hour timing. We do host a carbon farm planning Google group where we do talk about any of the trainings that and opportunities that are coming up, and we do use it as a sharing platform. It is used very minimally, so it doesn't overwhelm anyone's inbox. We do also do a lot of technical assistance trainings in the field. This year, we'll be working with Cal Poly and San Luis Obispo to do an in-person training field day in April or May, and we do those quite often if we're asked. Then we also provide one-on-one guidance for planners who need additional assistance. We develop and are always trying to enhance planning tools. We work on workforce development, and a lot of this we're coordinating through our regional hubs. So if there's anything that you're interested in, you feel free to contact me or your regional hub coordinator, and I can provide you guys with any of that information. So thank you for listening to us, and I think we'll open it up to a couple minutes of questions before we move on to our producer panel. I'm going to stop sharing screen.
Thank you, Lynette and Jeff. I don't see any questions written, but if anybody has a question, feel free to unmute yourself and just ask it directly.
No questions?
I don't see anything.
That's okay.
Maybe after the panel, there'll be some more.
Yeah, if you've been to our presentations before, you've probably seen much of this before, and hopefully you were already aware. Okay, well, if there are no questions, I think we can move on to the producer panel, which I think is probably the most exciting part about today, hearing from different producers throughout the state. I think we have a really good overlook of just different operations statewide. So I think it'll really provide a great landscape for understanding and questions. So I'm not sure, Sonja, how this part works. Do we?
Yeah, so I think we've got you all spotlighted now,
Okay.
and you can go ahead and discuss.
Okay. So we have 3 producers today, as Sonja said earlier, and we have Joseph Button from Straus Family Creamery, Lani Cockrell from Lani's Lana, Bear Ranch, and she's also the executive director of Modoc RCD. And we have Michelle Bearmar from Black Mountain Farm, who's a small producer in Southern California, San Diego County. And so I'm going to ask each one of them to give us a little bit of background with about their operation and experienced carbon farm planning. And so I will ask Lani to kick us off.
Okay, I guess along with some other producers in Marin County, we were one of the first carbon farm plants. So this is good with Carbon Cycle Institute. We did a carbon farm plan with the help of CCI in 2013. And for me, my initial motivation came from Rebecca Burgess with Fibershed. And we have sheep and we have wool. So she proposed an idea of if we started doing some carbon farming and we were successful, that we could call our wool climate beneficial. And that would be a tagline that we could use. And I was already starting a small yarn line. And so that was my initial motivation. And then after hearing from Jeff, a lot of the same things he just told us today were brand new to me in 2013. Despite being raised by a conservationist father and being in ranching, you know, I didn't really have a understanding that A, we have a problem, like climate change, and B, that agriculture can be the solution. And yes, we contribute to the problem, but we can also be a big part of the solution. The only solution big enough is kind of one of the quotes that resonated with me. And so by starting this work, I felt like we couldn't go wrong. We just needed to start and do something. So that was my initial motivation. A little bit more about our ranch. We're in Northeast California, Modoc and Lassen counties, and also into Washoe County, Nevada. Like I said, we have sheep. They range Nevada up into the Warner Mountains of California. And then we also have cattle, and we raise hay predominantly for the cattle, a little bit for the sheep as well, and don't necessarily sell it. So pretty much everything that we produce stays there on the ranch. We've played around now with organic eggs and direct marketing of products and things like that my kids are excited about. So that's probably enough. We have a lot of things to talk about.
Thanks, Lani. Next, I'm going to ask Joseph to give yourself a little bit of an introduction and background on Straus.
Hey, everybody. It's just a great pleasure to be here. I love when Jeff and Lynette ask me to talk because I get to hear from them and get renewed on all their expertise and the great things about carbon farm planning. So, gosh, Straus Family Creamery, we exist to sustain organic dairy farms. And, you know, primarily we do that by producing really delicious dairy products and selling them at a premium price at market, which helps us sustain the economics of the dairy farms that supply us with milk. But at the same time, another key thing we do is we partner with the farms in our network to make sure that they have resilient, productive farm systems. And center to that is carbon farm planning. It is an essential part of our business strategy to ensure that all of the farms that supply us with milk have really good carbon farm plans as well. My first foray into carbon farm planning was when I started here at Straus in 2016. I picked up the Straus Dairy Farms carbon farm plan. I guess that was one of the, the first carbon farm plans out there. And I read it. And I thought, wow, this is incredible. What does it mean? I think I need to call Jeff and understand. But since then, I've been on a journey with carbon farm planning, and I really sit between two worlds. One of my feet is rooted with the farm, with the farmer, and helping them to implement the carbon farm plan. Another one of my feet is kind of living on the technical assistance side and working with the RCDs, seeing that some of my partners and collaborators from Marin RCD are on the call today, and really partnering with them to support the farms. Straus Family Creamery, we now have what we call a dairy sustainability program, in which we are requiring every one of our milk producers to have a carbon farm plan by the end of this year. So right now, 9 of the 13 either have a completed carbon farm plan or are working on one, which is really great. I've got a lot of work to do this year, which should be fun. But we're also incentivizing our farms to actually build these plans. So we're paying them to have a plan, and then we're also paying them to implement the plan. And that's critical, because as we look at our supply chain as a business, we know that carbon farm plans make our farms more productive. It helps them be more productive from an operational basis, which supports their business. Second, it supports them in climate adaptation. I think we all have seen the boom and bust of drought and rainfall cycles these last 10 years. And at the Straus Dairy Farm in particular, when we had that last major drought, productivity in the grasslands at the Straus Dairy Farm, as a result of the carbon farm practices, were just as good or greater than any year previous with high rainfall. So carbon farm plan matters for climate adaptation. And then finally, I don't want to leave it out, but we do care about the environmental benefits, rebuilding ecosystems, rebuilding landscapes, enhancing biodiversity. And so those are all really important parts of our business and for the businesses of our partner farms. And I'm excited to be here today.
Thanks, Joseph. That was great. And now I'm going to ask Michelle if you can share with us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do as well. And you're on mute.
Okay, I'm back. I would love to, and thank you for inviting me here today. I've had the pleasure of working with RCD and our local food hub, food shed, to bring all this together, and I am excited to share. So Black Mountain Farm, we're kind of at the other end of the spectrum. We're a very small farm in the southern part of the state, San Diego. And so, you know, we're a 5-acre farm, but intensively managed, intensively grazed. We do pasture raised poultry for meat and eggs, and we do seasonal veg. And we started on a piece of ground that was, it was wrecked. There wasn't much out there. It was basically a 5-acre dirt lot with, like, you know, back in, I think we did our first soil test back in 2013, and like 0.5% of organic matter in the soil. And, you know, just not much you could do with it. So it's been a journey over the period of time. And then, you know, looking at all the practices, learning about the land, trying to bring restoration back to the land, and at the same time be able to use it and crop it as intensively as we do to provide, you know, products to our local community. We sell through our local food hub. We sell to our local some of our farmers markets. We sell on farm. And so that's been a big benefit to the community, but using that to bring life back to the soil has been an important part of the process. And, you know, the carbon farm planning process, you know, it came through our food hub. The Climate Smart Incentive Program was part of that. And I think what it's really brought, you know, with all of these disparate ideas on how we can improve our land, it's kind of brought focus to that. Because, you know, from my perspective, I'm looking at all these different things, but now we have a group of people working together to kind of consolidate those ideas and look at it holistically and say, these are the things that we can do. This is where you're at, and this is where you could be. And I think that's just not only huge, but it's a big benefit to us, but it's also being extended to the other. We have a lot of small farms in our area, and it's being extended to the other farms around us. And that's how you get resilience, not with one farm, but groups of, groups of those farms together. So, yeah, I can't say enough good things about those guys.
Oh, that's really great to hear. I'm glad that Bay was able to connect us today. And I love how you really touched on, even though you guys are a small farm, you do have a lot of big impact, and that other small farms are now wanting to get engaged within your area. So I think that's a good representation of what I've seen in the past once a carbon farm plan has really been adopted and we have created a carbon farm planner. And a lot of it does come from that communication that you have and trust you have with your technical service provider going through that entire process. Okay, so I'm going to move into our questions. And Lani, you already actually answered the question I had lined up for you of what really motivated you to engage in the carbon farm planning process. But maybe I'll flip it a little bit and ask you to put on your RCD hat as an executive director and maybe talk about, what producers in your area are motivated by to engage in this process, or how you get producers motivated around this. You're on mute.
Unfortunately, I don't have a real good answer for that because our RCD is really keyed in on things like managing the fuels loads and fire prevention. And that's kind of where the money is. So that's where we've been going. Myself, and I would like to include the UC Davis Farm Extension Office, is we are motivated to do more work in agriculture. And when I first started with the RCD, we did have a demonstration project with the Healthy Soils program going, and we finished that grant out, and we're able to show some results from that program, and that was a fun one. And then more recently, the Fibershed Healthy Soils program has enabled us to go out and share some of these ideas with producers as well. And that's been a good thing. I'm also personally trying to improve my knowledge rather than just from a working ranching point of view, but to have taken some of the Chico State regenerative ag classes. So that's a good thing. And then as far as talking to other producers, can I be honest? I was overwhelmed. Like, a carbon farm plan is huge. Jeff did that for me. I was kind of like, oh my gosh, I can't go out and share this with other producers because I didn't feel like I knew enough to really do that. I knew about practices and I knew that these things helped, but I didn't feel like I could help them get from point A to point B. And with Lynette and Mike with Fibershed and Jeff's help, again, I lean heavily on this team. I realized it's not that hard. The replan tool, these tools are out here that help. And so now, next time we get a funding source or an opportunity to share, I feel a lot better equipped. And maybe I'm answering some of the later questions too, because this is kind of where I was going with some of this stuff was, oh my gosh, my eyes were opened again with that it's not that hard, that we can do these things and we can communicate this stuff to others. So
Thanks.
hope that helps.
I might jump in for a second because that relates to one of the question that was put in the Q&A about Lynette, the planning portal that you mentioned being developed. Will it provide a template for carbon farm planning?
It basically is a portal where a carbon farm planner or entity has access to build out a carbon farm plan, and the producer can also go in and work on it with them. And then if there is somebody like a funder or a supply chain, would also have a login to only see a specific amount of those plans. And then it could be exported as a PDF as well, a plan would be. We're still building it, but it would just be one platform where you could do all your planning. So it wouldn't, so essentially it is a template, but on like an actual platform. And that is being built by Colorado State, the Comet team.
Great, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question. And this question I'm going to have Michelle answer, but how did your carbon farm plan open up new opportunities for funding, or has it opened up opportunities for you or for implementation of any sort?
Yes. So, you know, absolutely. To apply for funding, there's a lot of legwork that has to be done up front. And as a, well, okay, two things. First off, you need to know what's available to you. So the carbon farm plan has been, I mean, it's been really instrumental in bringing forth those practices. You know, there are the plan itself, plus you're working with technical assistance. And so those are the options that you discuss while the plan is being put together. It's not like they're throwing everything on there, but they're saying, what about this? Would you consider, you know, this type of activity? And so that interaction, I feel like, is really invaluable. It brings forth things that maybe you didn't even think about. So that part of it is like super valuable. And then, yes, you need to have a plan to apply for any of the grants. You need to know, I mean, you need to know what you're applying for, and then you need to have that organization up front to apply for the grants. And from my perspective, my bandwidth is really narrow, and unless it's like a slam dunk, super easy, it's been challenging for me. And so having that technical assistance to help apply for those grants has been really helpful. So yes, you know, through the carbon farm plan and some other technical assistance, we've gotten hedgerows in. We're halfway through implementation for pollinator habitat as well as windbreaks on our property. It's something I've been wanting to do for a very long time, and it's finally being done. We've gotten compost for our crop area. We're getting compost for our pasture area. You know, we're just a lot of practices that wouldn't be put in place if I didn't have the assistance to do it. So yes, I would say absolutely. The plan itself and the technical assistance that comes with it is invaluable.
That's really great to hear. And Joseph or Lani, I'm not sure if you have anything to add, but you're welcome to add anything if you'd like. You're good. Okay. All right. Our next question is for Joseph, and you already alluded to this a bit, but really, what aspects of working with your technical assistance through the carbon farm planning process do you think are most valuable and meaningful? And I guess you can also relate this through, you know, you do work with your local RCDs on new carbon farm plans. So what do you feel is most valuable? Michelle already kind of touched on this a little bit for her as well.
Yeah, this is a great question. I think the first thing I want to say is it really takes a community to build a good carbon farm plan, and it takes an even bigger community to implement one. So back in the start of my carbon farm plan journey, you know, we kind of had a big document with a lot of words and a lot of numbers, and I think a lot of confusion. And as we tried to convince other farms to also adopt a carbon farm plan, it just was something that was not normative to them. They hadn't heard of it, they didn't understand it. But as this movement built, and it was more than just me going to producers and saying, hey, this is something you should do. It was also the UC Extension folks. It was the RCDs, it was Carbon Cycle Institute. suddenly producers were hearing about carbon farm plans from a whole wide variety of people that they respected to varying degrees. And I think that opened up the appetite for farmers to, one, step into it. But when it comes to technical assistance provision, it's essential. And I think the most important part of it is the start of the dialogue with farmers. So strategic planning, you know, as running a business, running a creamery, we do strategic planning, but it's different than strategic planning on a farm. And one thing I've noticed about the producers that I get to partner with is they're always thinking about how they can improve their farm. A lot of those thoughts are internal. They're out in the fields, they're moving animals, and they have this whole inner dialogue of ideas. The carbon farm plan process gives them the opportunity to share those ideas, to dialogue, to maybe hear some new ideas. And I can't express how important that is, especially when we're introducing new concepts to farmers. We need to lay those seeds and see what grows. And a lot of times I will talk to my RCD partners that say, you know what, let's just suggest some ideas that are out there, maybe beyond the comfort zone of the producer, because they're going to ruminate on these ideas. They're going to then go and do their work and produce food, and they're going to think about it over time, and they're going to start to internalize how that might work in their system. So the technical assistance is key, one, for the start of the dialogue, and two, we've referenced this already. Once an idea has set and a farmer wants to then act on the carbon farm plan, how are they going to do it? How are they going to do it well? Because I think through the process, they've heard enough warning. Yeah, you can do this, but it can go horribly wrong. Or you can do it and it can go incredibly well. And so having expertise in how to implement these ideas is critical. So it's not just, hey, we're here to write a plan for you and then we're going to disappear. Hey, we're here, we're going to write a plan for you, and then we're going to be here when you're ready to implement it. And so that's another key, and it's a long dialogue. That's all you should look at it as, is a long technical dialogue that you're having with the producer. And so it's important for you as we all establish relationships with producers and are partnering with them to have that framework in mind. One thing that I tell the farmers in our network is this carbon farm plan, this is a 20-year guidebook for you. Don't try to implement it all at once. Let's first identify what's most important to you. And let's slowly pick away at this thing as you build a more regenerative farm system. And so that's another important thing. I think a carbon farm plan often can be overwhelming. It's not just the charts and the soil maps and the greenhouse gas metrics that nobody understands, but it's just the sheer vastness of it all. One of the things that I've done to counteract, I think, the immenseness of it is once a farm has completed their carbon farm plan, I then sit down with them and say, let's write out a 3-year implementation plan. And so I will give some ideas and I will tell them, I think these are probably the most important things for you to pursue, but I want to know from you what's also most important. And we agree on a 3-year timeline so that, one, I know what projects they want to do so I can look and see what grants are available to help them over those 3 years. And two, so we can actually start implementing over a time horizon that makes sense, right? So we'll identify 1 to 3 projects for a 3-year period. And that really also then enables us to work with our technical assistance providers to say, hey, here's Farm X and here's what they want to do. And so now you have the community thinking about this so that when grants come up, when opportunities come up for on the ground assistance, we can then say, hey, we know that this farm wants to do this, it was in their plan, and this is their priority, and we can move forward. So I think all you technical assistance providers on the call know your work is essential to really driving the success of these plans and be encouraged in that effort.
Thanks for that, Joseph. You said a couple things that just made me think about when I was at the RCD planning is that I had a team working with me to do planning. I had Jeff, I brought in the NRCS and someone from the UC Extension to really go out in the field and work with me on one landscape to really help educate those producers and different eyes on the ground. So to me, I think it is really valuable to have, a team and a village to help not only with, creating these plans, but to move it into implementation. And I do hear this from everybody that these plans are giant and they are also overwhelming to producers. And I think it's really great to hear how you can really break it down into something that is achievable into 3 years. And what I've noticed in planning in the past is that once you do that and you get beyond that 3 years, those producers are doing things all the time and you're like, whoa, 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 what are you doing? Can I write this down? Because they're then starting to take on a lot of that work for themselves, and because it becomes easy, they're starting to understand more. So that's been really a great thing for me to like view in the past.
That happened to us recently. We've been working on one carbon farm plan in Marin County, and we were at the farm the other day. They just kind of announced, hey, by the way, we're implementing 4 of the projects in the unfinished plan. And it was, they didn't even tell me about it. I think we all knew a smattering of what was happening, but that idea generation that we've been working on for over the course of a year had clearly stuck with the producer, and they were just going gangbusters. And so it begins to really steamroll, especially as the producers see the value as it relates to productivity on their farm. And so it's exciting to see how it takes off. Despite the technical complexity of the plan itself, the good that's in there that the producer can latch onto really can take off and be a driving force. So I don't think it's any reason to be concerned about the immensity of the plan. I think we all know that there's only 1 or 2 people that ever read the whole thing, but it's the nuggets in there that are driving change and really attracting the producers to look at opportunities.
Thanks for that. Thanks. Okay, my next question is for Lani. Were there any lessons or takeaways from your experience that you could share with others as producers or technical service providers that helped you? Any lessons learned from your experience, whether it was the planning process or implementation?
But I think bringing it down to that level where it's just, what do you really, really want to do? And help the producer not be overwhelmed by that CFP, because that's why we have you folks, and we're teaching people to write CFP plans. The producer really just needs to know that if they put this practice in, it's going to help. And then your thinking changes from production ag at all costs to carbon farming. And so you start to think, oh gosh, if we just add a little bit of variety in the seed that we're planting, it'll help with our soil health. Minimum till, no till, those practices are huge. Sometimes they can be tough for a producer to grab a hold of that because they're used to turning that crop under so they can put a new crop in. And so that can be a concept that's difficult in an annual cropping situation. What we've done on the Bear Ranch is we try almost exclusively to get a permanent crop in there, or alfalfa, which would be more of a 5, even 7-year crop sometimes if we're just grazing it and not trying to get 4 cuttings off of it each year. So a longer term permanent crop is kind of where we go with that. And also our compost production. We've been working on that compost production since the very beginning, and that's been a good one. Redirect me if I missed the question.
Oh no, you're great.
You're great. Okay.
Okay, well, we're getting down to about 15 minutes left, so I have a couple questions, and I'm gonna let any of the three of you answer these, or all three of you if you'd like. But going through this process, what would you tell technical assistance providers that you could see, improvement upon moving from the planning to implementation phase? Or did you feel like fully supported that you really don't have a lot to provide them on how they could improve?
I want to answer that real quick, and then I think Joseph might have more to add, or Michelle. But real quick, every time I get people like a TA or you folks come out to the ranch, you have a different set of eyes, and where I might see something that's just the way we do things, you get excited about it. And it's like, so by having those TAs come out and just seeing it with a different set of eyes, it helps to generate that excitement and keep you going as a producer.
Great. Thanks, Lani. Michelle, Joseph, do you guys have anything?
I'll chime in. I could say maybe a couple of things. So when we started the carbon farming plan, I'll be honest, I was a little in the dark as to what the whole plan was and the process, and these guys have been really great, and they did a really good job in putting it together. But I think a little more upfront on this is what the plan is and this is what it's going to do for you would, from a farmer's perspective, would be helpful. I mean, for me, it consolidated a lot of processes that I wanted to do, and it organized it. But I don't think I really understood the plan itself and that part of it. So maybe more on the introduction end of it. And then I'm hoping that we will get continued. So the plan is complete, but I'm hoping that we will get continued assistance with implementation and potentially modification in the future. I mean, I'm hoping the plan is not a static plan and is something that can be a living document. Like, this is something that we're struggling with. This is a practice that isn't quite working the way we expected it to. What can we do to make it better? Or is it an appropriate practice for our farm? So that kind of thing from a producer perspective. I just, those assurances that it's a living document, and then we can, continue to work with you folks and get that assistance that we need.
Yeah, this is a good question. I think from my technical side of things, all of our technical assistance providers are perfect and they're doing everything super well. I think from the producer side, just being, to piggyback on what Michelle said, clear and direct from the get-go. These are the benefits. This is why we're doing this. Some farmers, we explain to it, they sign up, we start the process, and they'll sit down at the table and they say, well, what do you want from me? Like, why are you all here? Who's funding this? Like, what do you want from me? And really being able to answer that question. We don't want anything from you, but here's what here's why we're here to help you, and here's what we think we can accomplish together. Those are really important questions to resolve up front. And I think the second thing that I've noticed in all the plans that we've partnered on is getting out in the landscape and talking about the potential practices right on the spot. Say, hey, here we are in this riparian corridor. It's completely degraded. Here's what I envision it could look like. How do you envision it? And having that dialogue right there on the farm, I think that's critical. Not every farmer is this way, but I think most of them are trained to see their landscape visually. So if we're spending too much time at the kitchen table and on paper, we might be missing a critical opportunity to get them in their landscape and ideate on the ground, so to speak.
Thanks for that. That's really great. One of the things that we do teach in our training is, or maybe not teach, but we talk about is that communication, that upfront communication. And I know as a new planner, oftentimes it's not the easiest thing to do. So that's great feedback. At least on my for me to understand how I can help, others become more confident in speaking with producers from the get-go on what carbon farm planning is. I'm going to pause for a moment and wait on these next questions, but I think it would be nice to maybe open it up to the group to see if the audience and participants have any questions for the three of our panelists or Jeff or I. And I know that there's also some carbon farm planners on the call that might be able to answer some questions too. So I'll just open it up for dialogue right now.
I do wonder, since there's a note from Ben Narwold about agrivoltaics, is that ever a potential practice in a carbon farm plan if it's replacing fossil fuel energy?
Yeah, absolutely. We've had a number of planners and producers have included either solar panel installation or actual agrivoltaic systems in their plans. So, and that's one of the nice features there is you won't find that in Comet Planner, but you can easily quantifying those benefits is really very simple. Lots of available models out there to quantify the greenhouse gas benefits of that kind of a system. So yeah, and I think that's going to be a growing interest across California as folks recognize the potential for integrating those two, production ag and photovoltaic panels, and seeing the benefits to both systems of integrating them together.
Yeah, and I would just add, we did a cafe hour on agrivoltaics, and I can give you guys all the link to all of our cafe hours in case you want to go through those and learn more about that. We did have a guest speaker specifically for that topic. Any other questions that we have for our panelists? Not, I have more questions for all of them. In the chat, I just posted our Vimeo showcase that has all of our past cafe hours. Maybe if you want to raise your hand if you have a question. Not, I can ask another one to you guys. So one of the things I'm kind of, oh, we have one in the chat. Let's see. Are there any funding sources for hiring a carbon farm planning consultant to help with developing a plan on private property? CDFA did have funding, what was it, a couple years ago, the cap gap funding for carbon farm plans. I'm not quite sure if they will continue that funding or not. Jeff, do you know?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, oftentimes I know RCDs or other entities or organizations do write this into grants, so they will have funding to do this work with producers. Okay.
And if you're striking out for ideas on funding or opportunities, don't be afraid to look down the supply chain to processors like Straus. We've been willing to help fund carbon farm plants for our producers in the past, and I know other brands are as well. So there's creative ways to think about it if funding ceases.
Yeah, and you might want to reach out to your local RCD. I know that a lot of them still have funding available to write plans, or maybe even your regional hub coordinator, because maybe if your RCD in your county does not have the capacity, maybe there is, someone within that region that might have the capacity. Okay. Looks like we have another question. For producers, what's your next steps on implementing the practices proposed in your carbon farm plan? Did you have a 3 or more year timeline for implementation? I know, Joseph, you already answered that. Lani or Michelle?
I looked at ours, and I still do look at ours as being something that's gonna just continue and evolve. We've got a list of practices, and we just keep, kind of checking them off or repeating them. Like compost application is something that we can just do again and do it on a different pasture. That type of thing. It's just kind of ongoing. And then other things like shelter belts and silvopasture, we just kind of try to keep doing it as we have some funding. We've got a pretty good shelter belt in, and also we're planning a silvopasture, very small, but it's down the lane as you drive in. It will look really cool. So just keep it going.
I would say we're kind of in the same boat where we've done some of the implementation and we're continuing. We're halfway through, the hedgerows. We'll finish it up really next month, and there's a lot of monitoring that's associated with that. And probably likely infilling over the years, as some will make it, some won't, and so that's all part of the plan, is to keep that going. And then some practices like the silviculture, those are things that may need to be sussed out a little bit further down the road, but I mean, it's there. And so, it's not all going to be implemented right now, but that's what it is. It's a plan to move forward with.
Yeah, I think for the producers in my network, what we're really working on is composting. We have all that manure, and it's key to lock it up into a stable form and get it back on the land. And so turning every dairy farm into a compost hub is kind of one of our big goals over the next few years.
Awesome.
Yeah. I did see that Mandeep, you had your hand up. Do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yes, Lynette, do we have time? I have a quick question. Okay, thank you everyone for your experiences. I'm in Southern San Joaquin Valley, and in your experience when using the carbon planning or implementing it, how is Sigma or water restrictions played any role, or have they or haven't yet? What have been your experience with water? Especially when, as a grower, you have limited water for your crop, but when you are asked to plant hedgerows or cover crops, and you have to determine, like, do we use the water for a crop or for the hedgerow? Do you have any insights on that? Thank you.
Excellent question.
So we're not in a restricted basin, and we do use groundwater for irrigation. But when we did the hedgerow, they're natives. They're all natives, and they're appropriate plants, and they were placed. It's not one size fits all. It's, we have different areas have different types of plants there. So we really work to make it appropriate to what we have going and the needs of the area, versus if it's, pollinators, beneficial predators, that kind of thing in one area, versus the windbreak will be really, it'll be really beneficial in the future when, we have some blockage of the Santa Ana winds and the drying of the soils. So keeping in mind that it's an investment now for something that's going to benefit us in the future, and then, having like appropriate, plant material, whatever it is you implement, make it as appropriate as you can.
That's fantastic, Michelle, and great question, Mandeep. And CCI also works at the level of state policy, and these are the kinds of big picture questions that have to be asked. And can we see our water use as an investment in the long-term improvement in the capacity of our soils to absorb water and to recharge those depleted aquifers? And the data is there to show that that's feasible. Certainly in in specific regions in the state. And so, yeah, really good, important, big picture question. And thanks, Michelle. Those are great examples of how investing a little bit upfront can actually result in long-term benefits for those groundwater resources.
Thank you.
Question. I was just going to chime in. Thanks for the question. I'm working with several producers here in the San Joaquin Valley, and water it's a concern for everybody. A lot of them do have orchards and they are planting cover crop, and they've seen, concerns about cover crops using up too much water, and those systems haven't really panned out, and they can see the water infiltration benefits and the increased water holding capacity there. But at the same time, just an hour ago, I was talking with the producer who was planning to plant a cover crop on fields that are going fallow with scarce water this year, and trying to convince that producer that it could be worth, being able to apply an inch or two of water to get a warm season cover crop established, and all the benefits that could bring. But that's a challenge when water is that limited on the west side here. But yeah, I think over the long term, producers are seeing that, establishing these cover crops and hedgerows and native plants don't require a big investment of water, and they can really create a lot of additional benefits.
That's great. No, thank you. It brings to mind, particularly on the west side, where we see upwards of perhaps 1 million acres coming out of production over the next few years, largely because of water restrictions. There's an opportunity, perhaps, something to look at as we see land going into photovoltaic farms, if you will. If we can integrate our production systems and our photovoltaic systems and actually harvest the water benefits of having that extra shade and the extra surface area to capture water and concentrate it in the interspaces, there are a lot of opportunities there that I think we're just beginning to think about and explore. And I think California has such a huge potential in this area, but we are just beginning to scratch the surface of what's feasible. So thank you, Noah, for that.
Thank you, Jeff. That's such a good note to end on. Maybe people can stay on a little bit if they want to, but I want to formally thank you, all 5 of you, for just sharing your insights and your knowledge. This has been such an enlightening conversation. So thank you so much. And I will end the recording there. And everybody, please do check out our short evaluation survey I put in the chat. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sonja.